The official notice was crisp in my hand, the paper feeling far too important for the lies it contained. It was a condemnation order. It declared the cabin, my grandfather's cabin, structurally unsound and slated for demolition. My own profession, the one I dedicated my life to, was being used as a weapon against me. The irony was so thick I could have used it for grout. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch my grandfather had built, the scent of pine and lake water in the air, and I let the rage wash over me. It was a cold, clean rage, the kind that settles deep in your bones and solidifies into purpose. This was the last move, the final overreach from a petty tyrant who had mistaken my patience for weakness. She was about to learn the difference. She was about to learn what happens when you try to condemn a structural engineer's family legacy using fraudulent claims. She was about to get a detailed, hands-on lesson in failure analysis. It all started 6 months earlier, with the death of my wife, Martha. The silence in our suburban home became a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every memory. Our 2 kids were grown and gone, building lives of their own, which left me rattling around a house that felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. I needed a project. I needed a place to heal. I needed to hear the sound of a hammer hitting a nail, not just the ticking of a clock. The cabin was the obvious answer. Tucked away on a 2-acre plot by Miller's Lake, it was the one place that had always felt like a constant. My grandfather, a man with hands like worn leather and a mind as sharp as a freshly honed chisel, had built it with timber he cleared from the land himself. Every log, every stone in the massive fireplace, was a testament to his strength and his love for the wild beauty of the place. After he passed, it fell to me. For years, Martha and I had used it for weekend getaways, and we'd always talked about retiring there. We'd planned to fix the place up together, shore up the foundation, replace the old wiring, and maybe add a screened-in porch where we could watch the thunderstorms roll in over the lake. Now, those plans felt like ghosts. But the work still needed doing, and I needed the work. So I sold the house in the city, packed my tools, and moved to the lake. The plan was simple: restore the cabin to its former glory, and in doing so, maybe restore a little piece of myself. The community around Miller's Lake had changed since I was a kid. What used to be a collection of rustic family cabins and a few year-round residents had slowly gentrified. Newer, larger homes had sprung up, manicured lawns creeping down to the water's edge. And with new money came new rules. With new rules came the Miller's Lake Homeowners Association. I knew about the HOA, of course. My deed included the covenants. I read through them before I made the move. They seemed reasonable enough on paper: rules about boat noise, garbage disposal, maintaining property lines. Standard stuff designed to keep the peace and preserve property values. I was a quiet man looking for solitude. I had no intention of causing trouble. I paid my dues and figured that would be the end of it. My first week was pure bliss. I spent my days reshingling the roof, the rhythmic pop of the nail gun a kind of therapy. I sat on the porch in the evenings, drinking coffee and watching the loons dive for fish. The air was clean, the water was clear, and the silence was peaceful, not oppressive. For the first time in a long time, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. That's when I met Carol. She arrived in a golf cart that was somehow both silent and obnoxious, its pristine white paint job a stark contrast to the natural grit of my gravel driveway. She was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in crisp linen pants and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. Her hair was a helmet of blonde spray, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were like 2 little ball bearings, constantly scanning, assessing, judging. "You must be Franklin," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was high and carried an air of unearned authority. "Just Frank," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. I'd been staining the new porch railings and was covered in a fine layer of sawdust. "I'm Carol Perkins," she announced, as if I should have known. "President of the Miller's Lake HOA. "Nice to meet you," I said, offering a nod instead of a handshake. My hands were sticky with stain. Her eyes swept over the cabin, and her thin lips tightened into a moue of disapproval. She took in the pile of old shingles I'd stacked for disposal, the stack of new lumber by the side of the house, the rustic, unpainted cedar siding that my grandfather had so carefully chosen. "Quite the project you have here," she said. The word project was laced with condescension, as if I were a child making a mess with mud pies. "It's a labor of love," I said simply. My grandfather built this place. Yes, I know the history, she waved a dismissive hand. Charming, in a rustic sort of way. However, we do have standards in this community, Frank. I'm sure you understand. I felt a flicker of annoyance. I read the bylaws. I'm not in violation of anything. Her gaze landed on the massive fieldstone chimney that anchored the west side of the cabin. It was a masterpiece of old-world masonry, the stones all gathered from the property. It was the heart of the home. That chimney, she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger. The stonework is irregular. It doesn't conform to the aesthetic guidelines for exterior finishes. I stared at her, then at the chimney, then back at her. I thought she was making a joke. It's a stone chimney. It's been here for 60 years. It's supposed to be irregular. The guidelines call for a uniform appearance. Cut stone or brick. Not rubble, she sniffed. The annoyance I'd felt flickered into a slow burn. It's not rubble. It's a hand-laid fieldstone chimney. And it's grandfathered in. I checked. Carol's smile became a thin, bloodless line. We'll see about that. The Architectural Review Committee is very particular. And as president, I have the final say. I just wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood. And to let you know that we'll be watching your renovations very closely. She didn't wait for a reply. She simply turned, climbed back into her silent, judgmental golf cart, and glided away down my driveway, leaving a faint cloud of dust and a thick residue of hostility in her wake. I stood there for a long time, staring at the chimney my grandfather had built. Each stone had been chosen and placed with care. It had warmed our family for 3 generations. And this woman had called it rubble. That was the first shot. I didn't know it then, but it was a declaration of war. A week later, the first letter arrived. It was a formal notice of violation, printed on heavy cream-colored paper with the HOA logo embossed at the top. The violation. The unapproved stone chimney. It cited a bylaw that I knew for a fact had been written 10 years ago, 50 years after my cabin was built. It demanded I submit a plan to remediate the non-conforming exterior element within 30 days. The fine for non-compliance was $50 a day. It was absurd. It was unenforceable. I wrote a polite, concise letter back, citing the specific clause in the HOA's own governing documents that exempted pre-existing structures from aesthetic bylaws passed after their construction. I included a copy of the original county permit for the cabin from 1958. I explained that the chimney was structurally sound and historically significant to the property. I mailed it via certified mail and assumed that would be the end of it. I underestimated her. The next letter came 2 weeks later. It informed me that my appeal had been denied by the Architectural Review Committee. The fines were now retroactive. I owed $700. The letter was signed by Carol Perkins. I had a suspicion the committee was just her, sitting at her dining room table with a glass of Chardonnay. This time, I didn't write back. I called my old fishing buddy, Judge Miller. The lake was named after his great-grandfather, and his family still owned a large parcel on the opposite shore. We'd known each other since we were kids, spending summers chasing bass and winters ice fishing in his shanty. "Sounds like you've met Queen Carol," he said, his voice a low chuckle over the phone. "She's a piece of work. Bought the old Henderson place 10 years ago and decided she was anointed by God to run this lake. She's trying to find me for my grandfather's chimney, Arthur," I said. "Let me guess, says it's not uniform enough for her delicate sensibilities. You've heard this one before." "Oh, yeah. She tried to get the Gundersons to paint their log cabin beige. Said the natural wood look was depressing. They told her to pound sand. She's been on a tear ever since." He gave me some advice. Document everything. Communicate only in writing. And for now, don't pay the fines. They were illegal, and she knew it, but she wielded them like a club to bully people into compliance. "She's a classic bully, Frank," he said before we hung up. "They feed on intimidation. Don't get emotional. Just be methodical." Methodical. That I could do. Engineering had taught me that every problem has a solution if you just gather enough data and approach it logically. I created a file. I logged every letter, every date, every interaction. I treated Carol Perkins as a structural problem. A faulty beam that threatened the integrity of the whole structure. The harassment escalated. She started sending violations for everything she could think of. My woodpile for the fireplace was untidy, my truck, parked in my own driveway, was a commercial vehicle and not allowed to be visible from the road. The bird feeder my daughter had given me was an unapproved lawn ornament. Each notice came with another $50 a day fine. The absurdity was breathtaking. It was like she was throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. I continued my work on the cabin, refusing to be deterred. But the peace I had come here to find was gone, replaced by a constant, low-grade anxiety. I found myself watching the driveway, tensing up every time a golf cart went by. She was turning my sanctuary into a battlefield. Then she went after my kids. My son, his wife, and my 2 young grandchildren came up for a weekend. It was the first time they'd seen the place since I'd started the major renovations. The kids, 5 and 7, were ecstatic. They ran through the woods, skipped stones on the lake, and I felt a flicker of the old joy I thought had been buried with Martha. We were having a barbecue on the deck. The kids were laughing, chasing a butterfly on the lawn that sloped down to the water. It was a perfect summer afternoon. Until Carol's golf cart appeared at the edge of my property line. She didn't come up the driveway this time. She sat there, about 50 yards away, just watching us. It was unnerving. My son noticed her first. "Who's that?" he asked, shielding his eyes from the sun. "That's Carol," I said, my voice tight. "The HOA queen." We tried to ignore her, but her presence was a pall over the afternoon. After about 10 minutes, she drove off. The next morning, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was another violation notice. This one cited a bylaw about nuisance noise. It claimed there had been excessive shouting and screaming from my property the previous day. It was a clear reference to my grandchildren laughing and playing. The fine was $200 for a severe infraction. That was it. That was the moment my patience cracked like cheap concrete under too much load. She had harassed me. She had insulted my grandfather's legacy. She had tried to extort money from me with bogus fines. But bringing my family into it, twisting the sound of my grandchildren's laughter into a violation, that was a declaration of total war. The peace-seeking man who had moved to the lake to heal was gone. In his place was a structural engineer who was about to apply the full scope of his professional skills to the systematic demolition of Carol Perkins. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going on the offensive. I was going to find every load-bearing wall of her little empire of control, and I was going to take a sledgehammer to them. My first step was a deep dive into the HOA's governing documents. Not just the bylaws she liked to quote, but the articles of incorporation, the meeting minutes, the financial statements. I sent a formal, legally worded request for all of it, as was my right as a homeowner. Predictably, she stonewalled. I received a letter back stating that the documents were proprietary and only available for review, by appointment, at her home. It was another intimidation tactic, designed to make it as difficult as possible. Fine. I made an appointment. Her house was exactly what I expected. It was one of the new, oversized pseudo-craftsman homes, with a 3-car garage and a lawn that looked like it was maintained with tweezers and a level. Inside, it was a sterile landscape of beige and gray, with generic art on the walls and not a single personal touch in sight. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom. She led me to a small office and gestured to a single, thin binder on her desk. "Here are the documents," she said with a smug smile. I opened the binder. It contained nothing but the bylaws and the aesthetic guidelines. "Where are the articles of incorporation?" I asked calmly. "The financial records? The meeting minutes for the last 5 years? Those are not available for general review," she said, her voice sharp. "They contain sensitive financial information. As a member of this association, I have a legal right to review them," I stated, keeping my tone even. "State law is very clear on this." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you a lawyer, Frank?" "No," I said. "I'm an engineer. I analyze systems for weaknesses. And when a system is deliberately opaque, it's usually hiding something." "I'll ask one more time. May I see the complete records? No, she snapped. This appointment is over. Thank you for your time, Carol, I said, standing up. You've been very helpful. Her look of confusion was satisfying. She had no idea that her refusal was more valuable to me than the documents themselves. It was proof of obstruction. Point 1 in my failure analysis report. My next call was to my old friend Gus. He'd been the head county surveyor for 30 years before retiring. If anyone knew the legal history of the properties around Miller's Lake, it was him. I met him for breakfast at the local diner. Gus was a wiry man with a face like a roadmap and a handshake that could crush walnuts. I laid out the whole story for him over coffee and pancakes. He listened patiently, occasionally letting out a low whistle. Carol Perkins, he grunted, shaking his head. She's a real piece of work. Tried to tell me the county had to pave the private road to her house a few years back. I had a good laugh over that 1 inch. I told him about her refusal to provide the HOA documents. Not surprised, he said. She runs that thing like her own private fiefdom. But you know, Frank, there's something funny about that HOA. I remember when they first tried to form it, back around 2008 inch. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. To form an HOA for an existing development like this, you need a supermajority of homeowners to agree to it in writing. At least 75%. I never thought they got the numbers. A lot of the old-timers, like your granddad, wanted nothing to do with it. My mind started racing. How would they have filed it if they didn't have the votes? Gus shrugged. People can file whatever they want at the county clerk's office. Doesn't mean it's legal. The clerk's job is to record documents, not to verify their legitimacy. If someone wanted to, say, forge a few signatures on the incorporation documents, well, it might take a long time for anyone to notice. Especially if the people whose signatures were forged have since passed on. A cold, hard knot of an idea began to form in my gut. It was audacious. It was criminal. And it sounded exactly like something Carol would do. Could you get me a copy of the original HOA incorporation filing? I asked. The one with all the homeowner signatures. Gus grinned. For you, Frank. I'll have it on your porch by lunchtime. True to his word, a thick manila envelope was waiting for me when I got home. I spread the documents out on my grandfather's old drafting table. It was a scanned copy of the original 2008 filing. Page after page of signatures from the property owners at the time. And then I saw it. Third page from the end. Lot 17. The signature was a looping, elegant script, Jonathan Reed. My grandfather. I stared at it, my blood running cold. I knew my grandfather's signature better than I knew my own. I had dozens of his old letters, his workshop blueprints, his signed deeds. His signature was a sharp, angular scrawl, the mark of a man who worked with his hands and had no time for flourishes. The signature on this document was a forgery. And a clumsy one at that. I spent the next hour carefully comparing the signature on the HOA document with a signed letter from my grandfather from that same year. They weren't even close. The slant was wrong, the letter formations were completely different. It was a forgery, and a bad one. My grandfather had been vehemently against the HOA. He'd told me so himself. He called it a bunch of busybodies trying to tell a man what color he could paint his own front door. He would never, in a million years, have signed this document. The whole thing began to crystallize. The HOA's very existence was built on a lie. A fraud. Carol wasn't just a power-tripping bully. She was a criminal. Her authority, the fines, the threats, all of it was predicated on a forged document. Her entire house of cards was built on a foundation of sand. This changed everything. This wasn't about a chimney anymore. This was about a fundamental fraud that had been perpetrated on this entire community. Now I had my mission. I needed more proof. A single forged signature, even my grandfather's, might be dismissed as a one-off anomaly. I needed to prove a pattern. Gus had also given me a plat map from 2008 with the names of all the property owners. I started going down the list of signatures on the HOA filing. Many of the people were, like my grandfather, deceased. But some were still around. The Gundersons, the family Carol had tried to force to paint their log cabin beige. The Millers, my friend the judge's family. The Thompsons, an elderly couple who rarely left their home. I started with the Gundersons. I drove over to their place, a beautiful, authentic log home set deep in a grove of hemlocks. Mr. Gunderson was out splitting wood. He was a man in his 80s, but he still swung an axe with a steady rhythm. I introduced myself and explained the situation. I showed him the copy of the incorporation document. He stared at it for a long moment, then went inside and came back with a pair of reading glasses. He traced the signature line for his property with a calloused finger. "That's my name," he said slowly. "But that ain't my signature. My wife, Helen, she always said my signature looked like a chicken fell in an inkwell. This here is too pretty." He went inside again and returned with his old checkbook. He opened it and showed me his signature. It was exactly as he described, a jagged, almost indecipherable scrawl. It looked nothing like the neat cursive on the HOA document. "I told them to go to hell," he grumbled. "That Perkins woman and her little committee. Told them I'd burn this place to the ground before I let them tell me what to do with it. We never signed a thing. Bingo. 2 forgeries." I spent the rest of the day visiting the other old-timers on the list. It was the same story every time. The Thompsons confirmed their signature was forged. Judge Miller, when I called him, laughed and said his father, who was the property owner at the time, would have sooner signed his own death warrant. By the end of the day, I had affidavits from 4 different families confirming their signatures on the founding document were forgeries. The entire legal basis of the Millers Lake HOA was a complete and utter fraud. Carol Perkins wasn't the president of anything. She was the ringleader of a criminal conspiracy. Now the real planning could begin. I could have gone straight to the authorities. With the affidavits and the clear evidence of forgery, I probably had enough to get a prosecutor interested. But that wasn't good enough. Carol had made this personal. She had harassed me, threatened my home, and insulted my family. A quiet legal proceeding where she got a slap on the wrist wasn't justice. I wanted poetic justice. I wanted to dismantle her empire publicly, using the very tools she had used against me, the HOA meetings, the public notices, the community itself. I wanted every person she had bullied and belittled to watch her fall. My engineering mind took over. I broke the problem down into phases. Phase 1, surveillance and bait. Phase 2, public revelation and destabilization. Phase 3, total structural collapse. For Phase 1, I needed to catch her in the act of being herself. Her power was based on her word against others. I needed irrefutable proof of her harassment and abuse of power. I went online and ordered 4 high-definition, motion-activated security cameras. They were small, weatherproof, and had excellent night vision. I spent a weekend installing them. One was mounted high in a pine tree, giving a perfect overview of my driveway and front porch. Another was disguised as a birdhouse, aimed directly at the property line where she liked to park her golf cart and stare. A third was a tiny pinhole camera I installed in the frame of my front door, giving me a clear shot of anyone standing on my porch. The last one I kept mobile, ready to be placed wherever I needed it. With the cameras in place, it was time to set the bait. I needed to give her a new, irresistible target, something that would make her overstep her, non-existent, authority so spectacularly that it would be impossible to deny. I decided to build a new woodshed. According to the fraudulent bylaws, any new structure, even a small one, required a permit from the Architectural Review Committee. I knew a request from me would be instantly denied. So, I wasn't going to ask for their permission. I was going to get a permit from the only authority that actually mattered, the county. I drew up the plans myself, a simple, sturdy 10 by 12 shed, designed to match the rustic aesthetic of the cabin. I submitted them to the county planning office. Since it was a small, non-residential structure well within my property lines, the permit was approved in less than a week. With the county permit taped securely inside my front window, visible to anyone who approached, I had a truck deliver a load of lumber and roofing materials. I stacked it all neatly at the building site, a spot clearly visible from the road. Then, I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the lumber arrived, Carol's golf cart came gliding down the road. She didn't even come up the driveway. She stopped on the road, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures. My birdhouse camera captured it all in crystal clear 4K. The next morning, a new notice was taped to my door. This one was printed in an angry red font. It was a cease and desist order. It accused me of beginning construction on an unapproved structure, in gross violation of HOA covenants. It stated that if the materials were not removed within 24 hours, the HOA would have them removed at my expense, and a special fine of $5,000 would be levied. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. She was threatening to come onto my private property and steal my building materials. My front door camera caught a beautiful, high-resolution video of her taping the notice to my door, her face a mask of smug righteousness. I ignored the notice. The next morning, I went out early and started digging the post holes for the shed's foundation. I made sure to be visible, working at a steady, unbothered pace. It was around 10 a.m. when she showed up. This time, she wasn't alone. She had two other people with her, a man and a woman I recognized as her cronies from the board, the vice president and the treasurer. They marched up my driveway like a little tin pot army. I leaned on my shovel and waited for them, a small, tight smile on my face. The camera in the pine tree was recording everything. "What do you think you're doing?" Carol shrieked before she was even halfway up the drive. Her voice was shrill, cracking with rage. "Good morning, Carol," I said calmly. "I'm building a woodshed. You were issued a cease and desist order." "This is an illegal structure," she screeched, waving a copy of the notice in her hand. "Actually, it's quite legal," I said, pointing towards the house. "The county permit is in the window. You're welcome to go have a look." This seemed to throw her for a loop. She glanced at the window, then back at me. "The county has no jurisdiction here. The HOA Architectural Review Committee has final approval, and you did not receive it." "That's because I didn't ask for it," I said pleasantly. "Because your committee has no legal authority to approve or deny anything." Her face went from red to a blotchy purple. "We are the governing body of this community. You are in violation. We told you we would have these materials removed, and we mean it." She turned to the men with her. "Gary, get the truck. We're confiscating this." The men, Gary, looked hesitant. He glanced from her furious face to my calm one. He looked at the "No Trespassing" sign clearly posted on a tree by my driveway. "Carol, I don't know," he started. "Don't be a coward, Gary," she snapped. "He is defying the board. We have to make an example of him." I decided to help her dig her hole a little deeper. "So let me be clear," I said, my voice still level and calm. "You are threatening to come onto my private property, without my permission, and remove several $1,000s worth of my personal belongings. Is that correct?" "It's not a threat, it's a promise," she spat. "These materials are evidence of your violation. They are subject to impoundment." "Impoundment," I repeated, savoring the word. "That's fantastic. Thank you, Carol. You've been a tremendous help." My calm demeanor seemed to enrage her more than anything I could have said. She took a step towards me, her finger jabbing the air. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Living in this shack. You are a blight on this community, and we are going to get rid of you. I will have this hovel you call a cabin condemned. I will see it torn down to the ground." And there it was. The threat she would eventually try to make good on. All recorded in beautiful high-definition video and audio. "Thank you," I said again. "I think I have everything I need." I turned my back on them and went back to digging my post holes. Her sputtering rage followed me, but I didn't turn around. After a few more minutes of impotent threats, they finally left. The trap had been sprung. The data had been collected. Phase 1 was complete. It was time to move on to Phase 2. The next HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue for the first reveal. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I didn't want to show my whole hand at once. That wasn't how you systematically dismantle a structure. You start with a small, strategic crack, then apply pressure until the whole thing shatters. My target for the meeting wasn't the forged signatures. That was my trump card, the charge that would bring the whole building down. No, for this meeting, I wanted to attack something she held dear, the HOA's finances. It was a subject that would get everyone's attention. Carol's refusal to show me the financial records had been a gift. It gave me the right to be suspicious. I started looking at the public face of the HOA's spending. The new gazebo in the small community park. The elaborate landscaping around the neighborhood entrance sign. The new, high-tech security gate that nobody had asked for. All of these projects had been pushed through by Carol, hailed as essential for improving property values, but they all had something else in common: they were all done by the same company. Perkins Landscaping and Construction. It didn't take a genius to guess the connection. A quick search of state business records confirmed it. The owner of the company was a man named David Perkins. Her son. She had been awarding no-bid contracts, using homeowner dues, to her own son's company. It was a flagrant conflict of interest, and almost certainly illegal if it wasn't disclosed to the members. I combed through every newsletter and every set of meeting minutes I could find online. There was no mention of the relationship. Now I had my crack. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was about half full. Maybe 30 people. The mood was the usual mix of boredom and low-level resentment. Carol was at the front of the room, running the meeting with her usual iron fist. I waited patiently through the treasurer's report and the update from the welcoming committee. Finally, Carol asked if there was any new business. I raised my hand. She looked at me, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Yes, Frank. I stood up, holding a single sheet of paper. I kept my voice calm and respectful, the voice of a concerned homeowner. Yes, Carol. I have a question about the budget. I was reviewing the recent expenditures for the new security gate and the landscaping at the entrance. It seems both projects were awarded to a company called Perkins Landscaping and Construction. I was just wondering if the board solicited multiple bids for these projects, as required by our bylaws for any expenditure over $10,000. A murmur went through the room. The security gate alone had cost nearly $50,000. Carol's face tightened. We chose the vendor we felt would provide the best value for the community, she said stiffly. I'm sure you did, I said, my tone still mild. But the bylaws are quite specific about the bidding process. Was that process followed? We have a trusted relationship with this vendor, she snapped, her voice rising. They have done excellent work for us in the past. I'm sure they have, I agreed. I was also wondering if the board was aware that the owner of this company appears to be your son, David Perkins. Is that correct? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. All eyes swiveled from me to Carol. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the lectern. That is a private family matter, she hissed. It has no bearing on the business of the association. Actually, it has quite a bit of bearing, I countered, my voice hardening slightly. When the president of an organization is awarding large, no-bid contracts to a direct family member, that's generally known as a conflict of interest. At best, it's unethical. At worst, it's embezzlement of HOA funds. So, I'll ask again. Was this relationship disclosed to the members before you awarded nearly $100,000 of our money to your son's company? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had no answer. The treasurer, the woman who had been with her when she'd threatened me, began to look very nervous. A man in the back of the room stood up. Is this true, Carol? Did you give my dues money to your kid without getting other bids? Suddenly, the room was buzzing. People were talking to their neighbors, looking at Carol with a new, suspicious light in their eyes. The foundation of her authority, her image as the selfless guardian of the community, had just sustained a serious crack. Carol banged her gavel on the lectern. This is an outrageous personal attack, she shouted over the noise. Frank is a disgruntled homeowner who is angry because he's been fined for numerous violations. He is trying to distract from his own refusal to follow our rules. I'm simply asking for financial transparency, I said loudly and clearly, so everyone could hear. It's a reasonable question. Can you please just answer it? But she couldn't. She just stood there, sputtering, her face a mess of rage and panic. She had lost control of the room. She had lost control of the narrative. For the first time, the other homeowners were seeing her not as a leader, but as a potential crook. She finally found her voice. This meeting is adjourned, she shrieked, and practically ran out of the room, her two cronies scurrying after her. I stood my ground as people milled around, many of them coming up to me, shaking my hand, asking me more questions. The seeds of rebellion had been planted. Phase 2 was a resounding success. Carol's reaction was exactly what I had predicted, vicious, desperate, and wildly over the top. She had been publicly humiliated, her authority questioned. A rational person would have backtracked, tried to do damage control. But Carol wasn't rational. She was a cornered animal, and she came out lashing. The next day, a community-wide email went out from the official HOA account. The subject line was, "A warning about a dangerous neighbor." The email was a masterpiece of slander. It accused me of being aggressive and threatening towards board members. It claimed I was a menace to the community, that I had a history of legal trouble, a complete fabrication, and that I was trying to destroy the HOA to avoid paying my fines. It hinted darkly that I was unstable and that residents should be wary of me. It was a clear attempt to isolate me, to paint me as the villain before I could reveal anything else. It didn't work. After the financial questions I'd raised at the meeting, people were skeptical. In fact, the email backfired. It seemed so unhinged, so personal, that it made her look even guiltier. I received several quiet emails from other homeowners, expressing their support and sharing their own stories of being bullied by Carol. But she didn't stop there. She tried to get me fired. She somehow found out where I worked and sent a letter to the CEO of my engineering firm. It was a rambling, incoherent screed, accusing me of unethical behavior, criminal activity, and being a disgrace to the engineering profession. She demanded my immediate termination. My boss, a good man I'd known for 20 years, called me into his office. He had the letter on his desk. He looked at me, a slight smile playing on his lips. "So," he said, pushing the letter across the desk. "Looks like you've been busy. Tell me, Frank, have you really been threatening this poor woman with a shovel?" I told him the whole story. He listened patiently, his expression growing more serious. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair. "I've known you for 2 decades, Frank. You're the most level-headed engineer I've ever met. This letter is garbage, and we'll be treating it as such. In fact, our corporate counsel might be interested in this. It's a pretty clear case of tortious interference." He paused. "Just do me a favor. When you finally bring her down, I want a front row seat." Carol's final, desperate move was the one that sealed her fate. It was the threat she had made in my driveway, now made real. She filed a formal complaint with the county, alleging that my cabin was a dangerous, dilapidated structure that was not up to code. She used her position as HOA president to give the complaint an air of officialdom. She requested an immediate inspection and a condemnation order. That was the notice I held in my hand on the porch. The culmination of her escalating madness. She was trying to take my home. My grandfather's legacy. It was time for Phase 3. Total structural collapse. The condemnation notice gave me a new weapon. It was an official county action, which meant it created a public record and a process I could engage with. It scheduled a formal hearing in 30 days. This hearing would be my stage. But first, I needed the final, undeniable piece of proof. The affidavits about the forged signatures were powerful, but it was still my word against hers. I needed a smoking gun. I needed a whistleblower. And I had a pretty good idea who it might be. David Perkins, her son. From what I had gathered, David was not a willing participant in his mother's schemes. He ran a legitimate business, and from what I could see of his work, he did a decent job. Being tied to his mother's corrupt, no-bid contracts couldn't be good for his reputation. He was in his late 20s, trying to make a name for himself. He was also, according to neighborhood gossip, terrified of his mother. I found his business address and went to see him, not at his home, but at a construction site where his crew was working. I wanted to talk to him away from his mother's influence. He was wary when I introduced myself. "I know who you are," he said, his eyes shifting nervously. "My mom said you've been causing trouble." "My mom is the one causing trouble, David," I said quietly. "And she's dragging you down with her. The contracts she gave you, the ones paid for with HOA dues, that's fraud. When this comes out, and trust me, it will all come out, you could be implicated. You could lose your business license. You could even face criminal charges. I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew I was right. Look, I continued, softening my tone. I don't think you're a bad guy. I think you're stuck. I'm giving you a way out. I'm not after you. I'm after her. But I need your help. I need to know the extent of the financial mess. I need proof. He was silent for a long time, looking at the ground, then at his crew, then back at me. I could see the internal struggle on his face. Fear of his mother versus fear of the law. She made me, he finally whispered. She said it was the only way the business would survive. She had me inflate the invoices. We'd bill the HOA for $20,000, but the actual work only cost $15,000. I'd give her the extra $5,000 back in cash. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a conflict of interest. It was a systematic kickback scheme. Embezzlement, pure and simple. Can you prove it? I asked. He nodded slowly. I have the real invoices. The ones with the actual costs. And I have text messages from her, telling me how much to add on. I kept everything. I was afraid she'd turn on me someday. David, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You have two choices. You can be a witness for the prosecution, or you can be a co-defendant. You help me, and I will make sure the district attorney knows you cooperated. The next day, a USB drive appeared in my mailbox. It contained everything. Scanned copies of the two sets of invoices, the incriminating text messages, even a short, secretly recorded audio clip of Carol telling him how to structure the kickbacks. It was the smoking gun. It was the dynamite that would bring the whole rotten structure down. With the evidence from David, the affidavits from the old-timers, and my own video recordings of her threats and attempted theft, I was ready. I compiled everything into a neat, organized binder, complete with a table of contents and an executive summary. I made 4 copies. One for me. One for the county prosecutor's office. One for the state attorney general. And one for the press. The day of the condemnation hearing arrived. It was a gray, overcast morning that perfectly matched the gravity of the occasion. The hearing was held in a small room at the county courthouse. It wasn't a formal trial, but it was a quasi-judicial proceeding, overseen by a county administrative officer. Carol was there, of course, sitting at the front table with an air of supreme confidence. She had the HOA's lawyer with her. She smiled smugly at me as I took my seat. She thought this was her victory lap, the moment she finally crushed the opposition. What she didn't know was that the room was filled with my allies. Gus the surveyor was there. Mr. Gunderson and the other old-timers were there. A dozen other homeowners, emboldened by the revelations at the last meeting, had shown up in support. My son had driven in to be there for me. And in the back row, sitting quietly and observing, was a man in a simple suit who I knew to be a lead investigator from the district attorney's office. And just as the hearing was about to start, one more person slipped into the room and took a seat. Judge Arthur Miller. He wasn't there in any official capacity, just as a private citizen and landowner in the Millers Lake community. But his presence changed the air in the room. The administrative officer, a man who knew exactly who Judge Miller was, suddenly sat up a little straighter. The hearing began. The county presented its case first, which was essentially just a summary of Carol's complaint. They had an inspector who gave a brief, noncommittal report, stating that the cabin was old but that he saw no signs of imminent collapse. Then it was Carol's turn. Her lawyer called her to testify. She spent 20 minutes painting a picture of me as a dangerous renegade, and my cabin as a crumbling death trap that threatened the safety and property values of the entire community. She spoke with a passion and conviction that was almost believable, if you didn't know she was lying through her teeth. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I declined to call a lawyer. I chose to represent myself. I walked to the lectern and placed my thick binder on it. I looked at the administrative officer, then let my gaze sweep across the room, finally landing on Carol. She was staring at me with pure hatred. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Frank Reed. I am a licensed structural engineer with 35 years of experience. The property in question, the cabin at 12 Lakeview Drive, was built by my grandfather. I have personally overseen its maintenance and renovation. It is not structurally unsound. In fact, it has a stronger foundation than most of the new houses in our community. I paused, letting that sink in. This hearing is not about structural integrity. This is about a personal vendetta. It is the culmination of a months-long campaign of harassment, intimidation, and fraud perpetrated by one person, Carol Perkins. Her lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. This is not relevant to the matter of the condemnation order. It is entirely relevant, I said, turning to the officer. Because I am going to prove to you that the complaint that initiated this hearing was filed in bad faith, based on malice, and is part of a larger pattern of criminal activity. The very authority Ms. Perkins claims to represent is, in fact, an illegal and fraudulent entity. The room was silent. I had their full attention. Let's start at the beginning, I said, opening my binder. The Millers Lake HOA was officially incorporated in 2008. To do so legally required the signed consent of 75% of the property owners at the time. I have here a copy of that founding document. I placed it on the overhead projector. And I have here, I continued, sworn affidavits from 4 separate landowners from that time, including the father of Judge Miller, who is present today, stating unequivocally that the signatures on this document, their signatures, are forgeries. A gasp went through the room. Carol's face had gone ashen. Her lawyer was staring at the document on the screen, his mouth agape. The Millers Lake HOA, I announced, my voice ringing with authority, has no legal basis to exist. It was founded on fraud. Every fine, every lien, every rule it has ever enforced for the past decade has been illegal. I turned a page in my binder. But the fraud doesn't stop there. For years, Carol Perkins has been using this fraudulent organization as her personal piggy bank. I have financial records, obtained from her own son, proving that she has been awarding no-bid contracts to his company and receiving cash kickbacks. Over the last 3 years alone, she has embezzled more than $75,000 in homeowner dues. I projected the 2 sets of invoices, the real and the inflated, side by side. The evidence was damning and easy to understand. And when I began to uncover this, I went on, my voice cold as steel, she escalated her campaign against me. She slandered me to the community. She tried to have me fired from my job. She threatened me, on camera. I nodded to my son, who hit play on a laptop connected to the projector. The video from my pine tree camera filled the screen. The audio was crystal clear. The whole room watched Carol, in my driveway, screaming at me. They heard her threaten to steal my property. And then they heard the final, fatal words, "I will have this hovel you call a cabin condemned. I will see it torn down to the ground." The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked directly at Carol. Her face was a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury. Her illusion of power had been shattered in front of the very people she sought to control. "You have no authority here, Carol," I said, my voice low and steady. "Your entire house of cards is built on a foundation of fraud, and I have the structural analysis to prove it. This condemnation hearing is over. But your legal troubles are just beginning." As if on cue, the investigator from the DA's office stood up and walked to the front of the room. He was accompanied by a uniformed county sheriff's deputy who had been waiting outside. He approached the table where Carol was sitting, frozen in her chair. "Carol Perkins," he said, his voice calm and professional. "You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." That's when she finally broke. The mask of the calm, superior HOA president dissolved into pure, shrieking rage. "You can't do this," she screamed, lunging to her feet. "I run this community. I am the law here." The deputy took her arm. She tried to fight him, flailing and spitting like a wild animal. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You ruined everything. You haven't heard the last of me. I will destroy you." Her impotent threats echoed in the room as the deputy cuffed her hands behind her back and led her, still screaming and struggling, out of the courthouse. Her lawyer just sat there, head in his hands, as his client was frog-marched away. The administrative officer, looking stunned, cleared his throat. "The complaint is dismissed," he stammered. "This hearing is concluded." The room erupted. People were cheering, clapping me on the back. Mr. Gunderson shook my hand with his powerful grip, a wide grin on his face. Judge Miller came forward and put a hand on my shoulder. "That, my friend," he said with a deep chuckle, "was better than any closing argument I've ever heard. You didn't just win. You liberated a captive population." The aftermath was swift and total. The Millers Lake HOA was legally dissolved. A court-appointed receiver took over its finances and found Carol had embezzled even more than I'd initially suspected. Her cronies on the board, facing their own legal trouble, cooperated fully with the investigation. Facing a mountain of evidence, Carol took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Her assets, including her big, beige house, were seized and sold off to pay back the money she had stolen from the community. She lost everything. Her home, her money, her reputation. Her name became a cautionary tale told around lakeside bonfires. Her son, David, for his cooperation, received 2 years of probation and had to pay a hefty fine, but he kept his business license. The last I heard, he was running an honest company and trying to make amends. With the HOA gone, a weight was lifted from the entire community. People started talking to each other again. A new, voluntary neighborhood watch and social committee was formed, focused on cookouts and safety, not rules and fines. The Gundersons' log cabin remained beautifully, defiantly unpainted. As for me, I finally found the peace I had been looking for. I finished the woodshed. I finished restoring the cabin, making it strong and beautiful, a place where my grandchildren would one day bring their own children. I added the screened-in porch Martha and I had always dreamed of. Sometimes, I sit out there in the evenings, listening to the loons call across the water, and I think about the whole ordeal. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone to grieve and to build. But I learned something important. Sometimes, the only way to protect your peace is to go to war. You can't let bullies, big or small, tear down things that are built to last. You have to stand your ground, analyze the weaknesses in their foundation, and apply pressure until they collapse under the weight of their own corruption. It's not just about revenge, it's about restoring balance. It's about ensuring that the structures we build in our lives, whether they're made of wood and stone or laws and community, are sound, just, and built on a foundation of truth. My grandfather built his cabin to withstand the worst storms the lake could throw at it. It turned out he taught me how to do the same.